Thank you. Thanks so much, Maurice. Thank you to the festival for having me back again. I want to get that record of being the most visited speaker. And this time, actually, I've come here in force because I brought my husband, Tom, and I brought my dog with me, who is actually in the church. So I'm hoping it all goes well. It's a good job that I'm not speaking on, I think, one of the first books that I gave a talk on here at the Isle of Wight Literary Festival, which was Thomas Cromwell. I'll say that name because the dog's name is Cromwell. And so if I kept saying it, I think he might get a bit overexcited. But no, I think that's the only time I'm going to say Cromwell in the whole talk, because actually this book is about my all-time historical heroine, Elizabeth I. The reason I became a historian, she absolutely inspired my love of history in general and of the Tudor period in particular. Now, I've studied Elizabeth for well over 30 years. It's probably nearly 40 years, but let's gloss over that. And I'd reached that fairly dangerous stage for any historian of thinking, yeah, I know everything there is to know about Elizabeth now. I've got it covered. And then 2 years ago, I was at home. I was working on a completely different book. I was about halfway through that book. And I saw a news flash. I should have had my notifications off, by the way, while writing, but I'm glad I didn't, because the news flash was from the British Library, and it just said Major Elizabeth I discovery. Yeah, obviously I didn't do any more writing that day, because I read this story and I was just completely agog, because they had found this piece of evidence that changed everything that we've believed for over 400 years relating to this most famous of Tudor monarchs. So I got on the phone to my publishers and basically begged them to let me pause that book and write this book, because it was just too good. It was so remarkable a discovery, and I'm going to be telling you all about it. Don't worry, I'm not just going to tease you and then say, well, you'll have to buy the book. If you want to know what it is, of course I'm going to tell you what it is. Well, it's a story that really starts at the end, because it relates to the death of Elizabeth I, which took place in March 1603. Well, Elizabeth was the last of the Tudors. She was certainly the longest reigning Tudor, 44 years on the throne. She's known as the Virgin Queen. So it was obvious throughout her reign that she would be the last Tudor, unless she changed her mind and married and had an heir. Then the Tudors would die with Elizabeth. Well, of course, that's what happened. And throughout her long reign, Elizabeth refused to name a successor. She didn't want to create that rivalry for herself by naming an heir. So she was on her deathbed, and according to the narrative that we've accepted for over 400 years, almost with her last breath, Elizabeth finally nominates a successor. She says, I will have none but the King of Scots to succeed me. Now, that moment where she nominates James VI of Scotland, the son of her old rival, Mary, Queen of Scots, inspired this Victorian painting, good old Victorians and their imagination, because it shows Elizabeth there, the deathly pallor on her face. James is kneeling before her to receive the power of the Tudor crown. He was actually 400 miles north when Elizabeth died in Richmond. He was in Edinburgh. But anyway, it's the imagination of the Victorians. And this painting, so it was inspired by that account that says, almost with her last breath, Elizabeth named James her heir. And that account is by William Camden. He was Elizabeth's earliest biographer. He started his account of her reign when she was very much still alive. And he was a very meticulous historian. He had access to lots of very reliable sources. And he wrote a full history of Elizabeth's reign all the way up to and including her death, and who she may or may not have nominated as her successor. That account was published a few years after Elizabeth's death in 1615 as the Annals of the Reign of Elizabeth I. And that's the account that the British Library have just discovered was a fake. So everything we believed for 400 years actually was not true at all. In fact, as we now know, Elizabeth died without naming anybody her heir. And James, even though he's been presented as the front runner, the natural heir, he was far from being either of those things. This apparently smooth transition from Tudors to Stuarts that we've believed all these years was in fact a much darker story, full of treachery and intrigue and a fair amount of skullduggery, I can tell you. And far from being the only natural heir to Elizabeth, in fact, there were any number of people who could have been king or queen when Elizabeth breathed her last. And it was said by a contemporary of Elizabeth, this crown is not likely to fall to the ground for want of heads to wear it. There were at any point in Elizabeth's long reign about 15 people with a very strong claim to Elizabeth's throne. So it's definitely not a one-horse race. And actually, James himself didn't even have the strongest claim. It does get a bit complicated when you look at the various claimants throughout the reign and how they were related to the Tudors. But I've simplified it for you because, in an hour, don't worry, I'm not going to take you through all the claimants and all the different lines through to the Tudor throne. But most of them were either related to Henry VIII's elder sister, Margaret, on the left there, or to his younger sister, Mary. Well, Margaret married into the Scottish dynasty. She married James IV of Scotland. And actually, her descendant would be the man who would one day take the crown of England, James VI. Whereas Mary married an Englishman, Charles Brandon. And Henry VIII had a say in all of this because he made a will that backed up 3 acts of succession that he passed in his reign. He kept changing his mind about the succession as he kept changing his wives. And throughout, though, what he said was, obviously, first in line to the throne, my children, Edward, Mary, Elizabeth, but if they die without issue, then it will go to the descendants of my younger sister, Mary. Why not the elder sister? Because age matters in the succession. Well, Henry didn't want a Scot on the throne of England. Simple as that. He hated the Scots. England and Scotland had been at war for many centuries, so he made it illegal for any of the Stuarts to ever inherit the English crown. So just on that basis alone, James VI should not have succeeded Elizabeth. Well, there are a couple of claimants who don't quite fit my neat rule of being related to Margaret or to Mary, and they are Isabella, on the left there. She's a Spanish princess, the daughter of Philip II. And then on the right, Henry Hastings, 3rd Earl of Huntingdon. Now, both of these, actually, they don't have Tudor blood at all. What they have is Plantagenet blood. So their claim kind of predates the Tudors. You might say, treasonous though it is, that their claim to the throne was actually stronger than Elizabeth's own, because even though we celebrate the Tudors today as this all-powerful, enduring dynasty, actually, they had a dodgy claim to their own throne because they were descended from John of Gaunt. He was a son of Edward III, so far so good, but the Tudor line sprang from John of Gaunt's affair with Catherine Swynford, who he later married. And so it was an illegitimate line. And Elizabeth herself felt even shakier on the throne because her own parentage had landed her in a difficult position. Her mother, of course, was Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's scandalous second wife. And Henry had dissolved that marriage just before Anne Boleyn's execution in 1536, which made Elizabeth, their daughter, a bastard. So little wonder that she was always very, very paranoid about anybody else who claimed to have a better right to the throne than she did. Well, certainly, If you were a betting person, you wouldn't have put your money on Elizabeth ever becoming queen when her mother was executed. And there were a few people in front of her in the line of succession, notably her two siblings, you see there on the left and right, Edward, Henry VIII's precious jewel, his only son, and then on the right, his eldest daughter, Mary, and sandwiched in between, Lady Jane Grey, the 9 days queen, who was soon supplanted by Mary. Well, these three only managed 11 years on the throne between them. So 3 very short reigns. So when Elizabeth came to the throne in November 1558, nobody thought she would last 5 minutes. So I'd ask you just to set aside hindsight for a moment. We need to get ourselves into the mindset of the early Elizabethans who were paranoid about the succession because they're very aware Elizabeth is the last of Henry VIII's children. There are none others, nobody else, no other Tudor claimants. And she tells her first parliament, I will live and die a virgin, not going to marry. So this makes people even more anxious because if she's not going to produce an heir, then who is going to come to the throne after her? Of course, they don't know. They can relax. She's going to be queen for 44 years. They don't need to worry yet, but of course they don't know that. And just a day after Elizabeth's accession, one of her rivals stakes her claim to her throne. Mary Stuart, better known as Mary, Queen of Scots, shown on the right there. On the 18th of November, so Elizabeth came to the throne the day before, she declared that not only was she Queen of Scots, she was Queen of England. And people wonder why these two women didn't get on very well. It's not going to get the relationship off to a great start that Mary has already staked her claim to Elizabeth's throne. At the time, she was betrothed to the Dauphin of France. Mary had spent much of her youth in France. And to be fair to Mary, she did have a very strong right to the Tudor throne, because she was descended from that elder sister, Margaret, who was the eldest daughter of the first Tudor king, Henry VII. So as I said, Margaret married into the Stuart family. She married James IV of Scotland, as you see there on the right. She married him in the year 1503 as part of a treaty that had a very optimistic name. It was the Treaty of Perpetual Peace between England and Scotland that endured about 6 months, actually. And she, at the time of her marriage, was just 13 years old. Her husband was 30. And it was a few years before a child was born, but she had that all-important son, the future King James V of Scotland, and Mary, Queen of Scots, was his daughter. She became Queen of Scots at the very tender age of 6 days old. She didn't remember anything other than being Queen of Scots. There's a lovely account of Mary's coronation, which she had to go through, even though she was a baby, draped in the heavy gowns of the royal regalia. And there's an account of how she has to be propped up during the ceremony of coronation. Well, Mary did have a strong claim, therefore, great-granddaughter of Henry VII, but she wasn't the only one, because I mentioned that Henry VIII favoured the descendants of his younger sister Mary, and really foremost among them were the Grey sisters. Lady Jane Grey was queen, as I mentioned very briefly. She was then supplanted by Mary, who soon afterwards ordered her execution. But there were still 2 Grey sisters living when Elizabeth came to the throne. The one in the centre is Catherine, and then on the right is Mary. So they traced their descent from that Tudor princess, Princess Mary, who married Charles Brandon, Henry VIII's best friend, so he didn't have a problem with their descendants. Well, Catherine Grey, she was soon courted by members of the Elizabethan world as somebody who might one day be their queen. So she was courted by Spain, by Catholics, but also by Protestants. And Catherine was quite canny. She was always fairly ambiguous about her religion. She was Catholic when it suited her, and Protestant another day. And she also did something else to strengthen her claim to the throne. Now, I'm going to tell you what she did, And you can assume that nearly every other claimant did the same thing. It happens again and again, and it never ends well. Catherine made a secret marriage to strengthen her claim to Edward Seymour. As the name suggests, he had royal blood as well. He was the nephew of Henry VIII's third wife, Queen Jane Seymour. So this was a power couple now. But they married, as I said, in secret, didn't ask the Queen's permission. Elizabeth was furious when she found out, and she immediately ordered them to the Tower, even though Catherine was by then heavily pregnant. Shortly afterwards, she gave birth to a son in the Tower. Didn't go down terribly well with Elizabeth when she heard that one of her rivals had a male heir. Well, Elizabeth had ordered the Tower jailers to keep Catherine Grey and her husband strictly separate in the fortress. Clearly that didn't happen, because about a year later, another son was born in the Tower, and this time, two of the yeoman warders stood as godfathers at the christening. So in the Tower chapel, it was all very cosy. Elizabeth was told of this, and she turned the colour of a corpse. She was incandescent with rage. She sent Catherine Grey to a separate prison many miles from her husband, whom she would never see again. It never ends well. A couple of years later, 1562, Elizabeth was staying at my place of work, Hampton Court, when she started to feel a little bit unwell. She thought she had a cold, so she took a bath to relieve her symptoms, but her symptoms just got worse and worse. She became increasingly feverish, and soon her physicians announced the diagnosis that everybody had feared. The young queen, who was only 29, she'd only reigned for 4 years, was suffering from smallpox. It was one of the most feared diseases of the age. Survival rates were perilously low. So it seemed to be playing out exactly as everybody had expected. You know, they didn't think she was going to last very long, just like her 3 predecessors. Well, panic spread across the court. People really were talking now of the Civil War of a century ago. They thought we were going to go back to the turmoil of the Wars of the Roses because there was a contested succession. Elizabeth hadn't named her heir. So her council called an urgent meeting to try to decide the matter. And as with so many other things in this period, they were split along religious lines. Half the council argued for the Protestant candidates. Lady Catherine Grey, she was Protestant that day anyway, and also Henry Hastings, that Plantagenet man who, I have to say, didn't want anything to do with being king. I feel so sorry for Hastings in this story because people keep pushing him forward because he's got a strong claim and he's a man. Those two things are really to his advantage. But he kept saying, look, I really don't want to be king. No, you've got a great claim. So he's in the mix. And then on the Catholic side, we have Mary, Queen of Scots, whose husband does briefly become King of France, but dies shortly afterwards. So she's back in Scotland. And on the right there, Lady Margaret Douglas. She's another Catholic claimant. She's the niece of Henry VIII and the future mother-in-law of Mary, Queen of Scots. To say it's an incestuous story would be an understatement. Well, the council argue it out long into the night at Hampton Court, and they still can't reach a consensus. But then news arrives from the suffering Queen's bedchamber. Against all the odds, she has pulled through. She has survived. And when she found out that as she'd been battling for her life, her council had been busy meeting to discuss the succession, they were in deep trouble. Elizabeth ranted she would hear no word of the succession from the jangling mouths of her subjects. But in reality, there was nothing she could do to stop it because this had frightened everybody, this near-death experience that their queen had had. And for the next 40 years, Elizabeth would be plagued with pressure to name her heir or at least to marry and give England an heir herself. And that pressure was only matched by Elizabeth's determination to do neither of those things. 3 years later, 1565, another of the Grey sisters caused Elizabeth a few moments of unease. Now, Lady Mary Grey, she was described by a rather cruel Spanish ambassador as being little, crook-backed, and very ugly. And she was only about 4'9". And Lady Mary, you know what I'm going to say, she made a secret marriage. She hadn't learned from the example of her elder sister Catherine, but the difference was she didn't do it to strengthen her claim to the throne, almost certainly, because she didn't marry somebody with a claim to the throne. She married quite a lowly servant at Elizabeth's court, the very appropriately named Thomas Keys, who was in charge of security at the palaces. And he was described as being the biggest gentleman at court. He was over 7 foot tall. So it surprised everybody. They looked like kind of physical opposites. But it was clear this was a love match. They'd fallen in love. They knew the Queen never said yes if asked if somebody could marry. So they just went ahead anyway. What could possibly go wrong? Well, Elizabeth found out. Having learned from Catherine's example, she sent them to separate prisons, and poor Mary never saw her husband again. Really, though, there was only one woman causing Elizabeth the greatest amount of grief in the 1560s, and that was her greatest rival north of the border, Mary, Queen of Scots. Well, having been widowed and returned to Scotland, Mary, unlike Elizabeth, had no intention of remaining unmarried, and the hunt was on almost immediately for a husband. Well, Elizabeth surprised everybody because, of course, she took a close interest in who Mary was going to marry. So she put forward a candidate of her own. The gentleman on the left there is Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, who was Elizabeth's own great favourite, the man rumoured to be her future husband. I think actually Elizabeth was not serious in making this suggestion. It was almost intended as an insult to Mary. Here, you can have one of my cast-offs. I don't want to marry him. You have him. Well, that marriage came to nothing because Mary fell head over heels in love with somebody else. The young man on the right there is Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. He has royal blood. He is the son of Lady Margaret Douglas. And Henry Lord Darnley clearly was a good-looking young man. When Mary first saw him, she decided that he was, quote, the lustiest and best proportioned long lad I've ever seen. Take from that what you will. She declared she would have none but him. And you know what they say about marry in haste, which Mary did, and she certainly repented because his good looks disguised a much darker character. He was very cruel and vain and arrogant and intensely jealous of anyone who enjoyed influence with his new wife, Mary, in particular, her Italian secretary, David Rizzio. Well, Darnley became so fixated with Rizzio that he joined a plot to have the poor Italian secretary assassinated. And this plot took place in Holyrood House Palace in Edinburgh late one night in March 1566 when Mary was conversing with Rizzio and suddenly a gang burst in, and as poor Rizzio clung to Mary's skirts begging for mercy, they stabbed him no fewer than 52 times. If you visit Holyrood today, you can still see the blood-stained floorboards on the spot where Rizzio was murdered, painted there by the Victorians and touched up every few years, apparently, because visitors love them, but it was on the right spot anyway. Mary was actually heavily pregnant at the time of Rizzio's murder, and she almost miscarried from the shock. But she survived, so did the child, and he was born in June. 3 months later, he was the future King James VI of Scotland and first of England. His birth seemed to have effected a reconciliation between his parents, Mary and Darnley, but it wasn't set to last, because just a few months later, Darnley would be dead. What I show you here is one of my favourite documents in the National Archives. It's like a Tudor crime scene sketch. because it shows what happens late one night in February 1567 when Darnley was staying in Edinburgh in a house called Kirkerfield. It's very close to St Giles Cathedral today. It no longer exists, and you'll hear why. Because at midnight, there was a huge explosion at the house. It woke all the citizens of Edinburgh. And Darnley, his guards rushed in trying to find and to save their master, but they couldn't find him anywhere amongst the wreckage. And then they did find him. If you see top right there, you might just make out two figures lying in the grounds of Kirkerfields, Darnley and a manservant of his. They were half naked and both dead. Well, they bore no marks of the explosion on their bodies, but they did bear some marks around their necks. They'd clearly been strangled, and then there'd been a botched attempt to cover it up with the explosion. Who done it? It was a difficult question to answer because pretty much the whole of Scotland wanted Darnley dead by this stage. He was very, very unpopular. But one man quickly emerged as being the prime suspect. James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, a very powerful Scottish lord, ambitious for even more power than he already enjoyed, and he saw Darnley as standing in his way. So there was a manhunt on for Bothwell, and you can imagine what Mary, Darnley's widow, is going to do to Lord Bothwell. Marry him is what she does. And so now we have the soap opera playing out in Scotland that Elizabeth, south of the border, is enjoying every moment of, because here we have her greatest rival making an absolute catastrophe of her role in Scotland. There's no way Mary is going to be able to hold on to power after making this marriage to Bothwell. And indeed, the next year she is forced to abdicate in favour of her 13-month-old son, James, and she's taken prisoner. Now, Mary does manage to escape her prison, and she's faced with a choice. Does she go back to France, where she spent her youth, or does she go to England? She was never great at decisions because Mary decided to go to England, I think expecting that she would receive some support from Elizabeth, her sister queen, as she called her, that Elizabeth would send her back to Scotland with an English army to reclaim her crown. But of course, Elizabeth wasn't going to do that. Now she had her rival on English soil. She was going to keep her there, and she was going to keep her prisoner. And so Mary remained the captive queen for almost 20 years, moved to a succession of safe houses across the country. But Elizabeth didn't entirely enjoy the upper hand in this relationship, because now Mary was on English soil. She was within tantalizing reach of all of England's Catholics who wanted her to be Queen of England, not Elizabeth. And so there were immediately plots starting to gather ground, all aimed at assassinating Elizabeth and making Mary queen. And those plots just became more numerous after 1570, when the Pope excommunicated Elizabeth and encouraged her Catholic subjects to rise up against her, to assassinate her, and to make Mary queen. Poor Walsingham, Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's great spy master, he was kept very busy with finding out about these plots and foiling them before they could come to fruition. He really was the man keeping Elizabeth alive at this stage. But Elizabeth had more than just Mary, Queen of Scots, to worry about. And at this stage of proceedings, it does rather remind me of that game Whack-A-Mole. You kind of get rid of one and another pops up. And the one who pops up in 1575 is the little girl in the centre there, Arbella Stuart. She is born in that year. Now, she, as the name suggests, is of Scottish descent. She's related to that Tudor Princess Margaret, and she has two quite formidable grandmothers. On the right there, Lady Margaret Douglas, Henry VIII's niece, Darnley's mother, and Bess of Hardwicke on the left, a wonderful figure of the Elizabethan age. Now, these two matriarchs had conspired a marriage between their children to produce an heir to the throne. And that works because their son and daughter marry, and very quickly a child is born, Arbella. The parents, by the way, die soon after Arbella's birth, as does Lady Margaret Douglas. So Arbella goes to Derbyshire with her maternal grandmother, Bess, to be raised at Hardwicke Hall. It's an unfortunate upbringing for a potential Queen of England, because on the one hand, Bess makes Arbella very aware of her royal blood and status. But on the other hand, she denies her any freedom of action. It's very much like, and I'm sure it'll be familiar to you here on the island, Queen Victoria's upbringing, which was, known to be, according to the Kensington system, a very suffocating system where no freedom of action is allowed. And it was just the same for Arbella. The result of this was that she grew up very, very arrogant because she knew she was royal, but also very naive because she hadn't been allowed to experience the world. It would have fatal consequences. In 1586, one of those Catholic plots I mentioned came to the attention of Walsingham. He's there on the right. Well, poor old Walsingham, I think by this stage he's desperate for a day off from hunting down plotters. And so rather than just have this latest conspirator arrested and put in prison and executed like all the others, he decides to lay a trap for Mary. Because throughout the years preceding, he and the rest of Elizabeth's council have desperately tried to persuade her to have Mary put to death. But Elizabeth has always resisted because she rightly claims there's not enough evidence against the captive queen. So Walsingham makes it his business this time to find the evidence. Anthony Babington, the gentleman on the left, is the conspirator. He is leading this Catholic plot to assassinate Elizabeth to make Mary queen, just like all the others. So Walsingham, he establishes what both Babington and Mary believe to be a secret channel of communication. But all the way along, Walsingham's agents are intercepting the letters that are smuggled in the corks of beer barrels, by the way. And they open those letters carefully, they copy down the contents, reseal them, send them on. So Mary and Babington are unaware that Walsingham is reading every single letter. It's not long before Babington writes to Mary to tell her he's found 6 men ready to ride south and kill the Queen of England. Walsingham waits rather anxiously for Mary's reply, and it soon arrives. She says, "Set the 6 gentlemen to work," and she signs the letter. When Walsingham's agent opens that letter, he draws a gallows on it. Got her. You can imagine them saying, now Elizabeth has her evidence and she can't stop what happens next, even if she wanted to. Mary is put on trial. She's swiftly found guilty and condemned to die for high treason. Elizabeth prevaricates over the signing of her execution warrant, but eventually does, and Mary is beheaded in February 1587. You see a contemporary sketch of that there on the right. Well, Elizabeth had prevaricated, not so much out of any sympathy for Mary, but because she feared a backlash from Catholic Europe. And indeed, that backlash does come the next year in the form of the Armada. And she also fears what executing Mary will do to her relationship with Mary's son, James VI. And very soon after Mary dies, Elizabeth writes to James and sort of goes down on bended knee in letter form, pleading with him that she never meant to do it. She didn't sign the warrant. She didn't order it to be issued. She calls the execution that miserable accident. Certainly was for Mary. And James, on the other hand, so he's under pressure from the whole of Scotland to go to war against England to avenge his mother's death. But he doesn't really want to, because James was raised not knowing Mary. He has no relationship with his mother. And also he was raised by men very hostile to Mary. So actually he has a really negative view of his now late mother. And above all, James is desperate for Elizabeth to name him her heir. So he doesn't really want to rock the boat too much. So they have this lovely interplay of letters with Elizabeth really saying, I'm so sorry, I accidentally chopped your mum's head off. And James eventually saying, okay, look, you really shouldn't have done it, but let's just never mention this again. And they never do. And they have this hugely long-running correspondence. Fun fact, these two write more letters to each other than any other two monarchs throughout the early modern period. And Elizabeth's letters are all tending to the same effect: advice. Advice for James about how to be a successful King of England. So it seems that she has marked him out as one of the leading contenders for her throne, but she never names him as such. Well, a year after Mary, Queen of Scots' execution, Arbella Stuart makes her first appearance at Elizabeth's court. As you can see, she has grown up. She's now 13 years old, and she might remind you of somebody else at court, and that was very much deliberate. In fact, this miniature of her was only recently discovered, and it was first identified as being Elizabeth. You can see why. Arbella did have the same red hair as Elizabeth, but Bess of Hardwicke, her ambitious grandmother, made sure that when she appeared at court, she was dressed exactly like the Queen, to sort of send out a message: look to her, she might be your Queen next. Unfortunately, though, because of that sheltered upbringing, Arbella didn't know how to behave at court, and within about 5 minutes, she'd managed to offend everybody at court by demanding precedence because she was the most important woman next to the Queen. And she also, by the way, flirted with Elizabeth's great favourite, the Earl of Essex, which certainly didn't go down very well with Elizabeth, who banished Arbella from court for 3 years. But she remained a contender for the throne. By the time the 1590s, the closing decade of Elizabeth's reign, came in, really the succession was all anybody could talk about, because now Elizabeth is in her 60s. I would remind you that the average life expectancy for a woman in this period is 35. So there's a sense that Elizabeth is living on borrowed time. Surely she's going to die soon, but she still hasn't named her heir. Well, by now, many of those original claimants are dead, including poor Henry Hastings, who probably had on his gravestone, "I never wanted it anyway." But it's a case of survival of the fittest, and one of the fittest is emerging as being James of Scotland. He's still going strong, and he's now married, and crucially, he has a son, Henry, on the right there, born in 1594, and James will go on to have another son by Anne of Denmark, the future Charles I, and Elizabeth. So this makes James more popular in England. He hadn't been up until now. But now Englishmen are starting to think, well, at least he's male, big tick. He's got experience of ruling in Scotland, and he's got a ready-made dynasty. So if he comes to the throne, there's going to be no doubt about the succession. He's not, though, out of the woods yet, because in 1598, a scandal erupts that almost destroys James's hopes of ever inheriting the English throne. In that year, a man called Valentine Thomas is arrested on the Scottish border for stealing horses. When the English authorities question Thomas, they get more than they bargained for, because he tells them that he has had 5 or 6 secret meetings with the King of Scots, during which he has been paid handsomely to ride south to England and murder Elizabeth on James's behalf, because James has run out of patience waiting for Elizabeth to name him her heir. Well, Elizabeth is told of this, and she chooses not to believe it. She thinks Valentine Thomas is just a fantasist. We will never know. So she, out of courtesy, writes to James and just tells him, but says, don't worry, he's in prison, he'll never leave, nobody will ever hear about this. James really should have listened to Elizabeth on this and many other occasions. He always ignored her advice. And he wrote letter after letter to Elizabeth. Talk about protesting too much. I've never met this man in my life before. I don't know Valentine Thomas. I haven't plotted to have you murdered. And Elizabeth starts to get a bit suspicious that he's protesting too much. And then James ups the ante by demanding that Elizabeth publish a proclamation to the people of England, denying that he was involved in any way in this assassination plot. You see that proclamation there on the right. Well, all that proclamation achieves is to A, make people aware of a plot they'd never heard of, and B, make them really believe that James was involved in it. So it was a crisis point now for James. It had really damaged his claim to Elizabeth's throne, and he had to change tack, and quickly. So he starts to cultivate allies on Elizabeth's government who he thinks can help him to the throne. On the right there, he begins with the Earl of Essex, because he's the Queen's greatest favourite. But Essex takes himself out of the picture when he rebels against Elizabeth in 1601, and he's executed. So James has to change allies to the man in the centre, Robert Cecil, undoubtedly the most powerful man in Elizabeth's government. Now, Cecil seems to have taken a pragmatic view. The King of Scots isn't ideal as a future king. He's actually technically illegal, according to Henry VIII's will. But he's male, he has experience, etc., etc. So Cecil agrees to help James. And it's thanks more to Cecil than anything or anyone else that James does eventually take the throne of England. We should be calling him the kingmaker just as much as Warwick. He even goes down to the detail of drafting a proclamation that James is now king many months before Elizabeth dies, which brings us back to that moment in March 1603 when Elizabeth, having moved to Richmond Palace, only the gatehouse survives today, you see it there, she's moved there to die. She knows she doesn't have long left to live. And she's followed there by members of her council because now they pile on the pressure, just as they have done for 40 years or more, to, at the last gasp, name her successor. And Robert Cecil is the most insistent. And at one point he says, "Ma'am, you must name your successor." There is an ominous silence. Elizabeth rouses herself from her bed and says, little man, must is not a word to use to princes he is sent out, with his tail firmly between his legs." What happens next is the subject now of intense debate, because now we know William Camden's account is not to be relied upon. Are there any other eyewitnesses who say that at the last Elizabeth named James? There are none. The closest we get is that one of those present at Richmond said that when James of Scotland was mentioned, Elizabeth did this. She just raised her hand. And that was taken to mean, oh, the Queen wants the King of Scots to be the next King of England. You know, it's quite taking things a bit too extreme, I think. But also because Elizabeth made the same gesture when the Archbishop of Canterbury was mentioned as well. But no, they glossed over that and they put enormous importance on this hand gesture. And then it's like Chinese whispers, because 4 years later, the Venetian ambassador writes about this and this hand gesture. And by then it's become this. King of Scots was mentioned and Elizabeth made the sign of a crown over her head. She did nothing of the sort. In fact, there's no reliable evidence that she indicated James in any way. But it was James who came to the throne when Elizabeth breathed her last. And he was proclaimed, because that speech had already been drafted by Robert Cecil. He made his way south to claim his stolen crown. And any short-lived popularity was soon replaced by profound unease. I think James had been quite popular for a few weeks because people were relieved that at least there hadn't been civil war, that there was an uncontested king on the throne. But he didn't remain popular because he brought with him the Scottish way of doing things. He refused to listen to any of that advice that Elizabeth had been drip-feeding him over the years. And he had a number of obsessions that proved deeply unpopular with the people of England. He liked to be surrounded by a coterie of very handsome male favourites. That excited quite a lot of gossip. And of course, he was a great witch-hunting king at a time when England had long since cooled off from the idea that witches even existed. James clashed with the English Parliament. Elizabeth had tried to get him to understand that you had to work in partnership with Parliament. It wasn't like Scotland, where Parliament rubber-stamped what the king wanted. And James also clashed with England's Catholics to such an extent that within 2 years of his accession, Robert Catesby concocted an audacious plot to, as they put it, blow the Scottish king to the heavens with a huge quantity of gunpowder that was put in place underneath the Houses of Parliament, ready for when James arrived for the state opening. It was a very near miss indeed. Guy Fawkes was discovered just hours before he lit the fuse. So James was rattled, and he was rattled even more when his erstwhile rival emerged from the shadows. Arbella Stuart, remember her? Well, she had been really his greatest rival for the English throne. And then James heard in 1610 that Arbella had made a pitch for the throne by, you know what I'm going to say, marrying in secret to somebody with royal blood. She married William Seymour, the grandson of Lady Catherine Grey. Well, James heard of it, and he imprisoned them both in the Tower, but it's a sign of how unpopular James was and how much support there was for Arbella that she and her husband escaped. I can tell you because I work at the Tower. In 1,000 years, we've only had 11 escapees. They must have had help. They were to be rowed across the channel to safety in separate boats. But as they reached the rendezvous point, Arbella got there first, and she made the fateful decision to wait for her husband's boat to appear. As she waited, the English authorities came into view. They saw Arbella, and they arrested her and brought her back to the Tower. She would never leave it. She died there a prisoner. Just minutes later, her husband's boat appeared, and he made it safely over to the continent. The same year as Arbella's death, 1615, William Camden's first instalment of his History of Elizabeth was published. But really, Camden didn't intend to publish it at all. He wrote that deathbed scene, and then he put the book to bed because he was conscious that he had glorified Elizabeth's reign, and now there was a new king on the throne. So he thought, probably not best to publish this book. But James heard about it, and James spied what we might call a PR opportunity. He went to see Camden, and he ordered him to take up his quill again and to start work on a few revisions to his History of Elizabeth in order to have it published. And those revisions are exactly what the British Library researchers have found, and that has changed everything that we thought we knew about the succession. So the manuscript on the right there, that's one of the volumes of Camden's original notes, his original manuscript for the Annals of Elizabeth. And what the researchers noticed is there were an awful lot of things crossed out. And as Camden himself said, King James would need revise it himself, and many things were struck out and many things altered. I don't know if you can just make out, on the left-hand page, if I point, no, I can't quite point to that screen, but the left-hand page of that book has got a section pasted in. The researchers noticed this happened quite a lot. 200 pages pasted in, covering up Camden's original text, which made them curious. And then using this very clever technique called transmitted light, see there on the left, they were able to sort of x-ray those pages and uncover the words that Camden had originally wrote. And that's when they discovered that in Camden's original of the deathbed scene, he had said that Elizabeth died without naming anybody her heir. And then he's been made to go back and put words in the dead queen's mouth, I will have none but the King of Scots. And that's the version that appears in the published Annals of Elizabeth, and the version that historians for 400 years, myself included, have relied upon. Well, Camden at least managed to delay this. He hated having to falsify history. It crucified him. But he took his time over these revisions. And really, the second installment of the Annals that covered the succession only appeared in 1625, by which time both Camden, you see here his memorial in Poets' Corner, Westminster Abbey, and James were both dead. So actually, it didn't help James in his lifetime, but it certainly helped him in the 400 years since to be seen as the named heir the rightful successor to Elizabeth, and it also helped his son and successor Charles I to seem like the rightful king, because Elizabeth had named his father. Charles, like his father, disregarded Elizabeth's advice. He rode roughshod over the English Parliament. When it didn't agree with him, he dissolved it and kept doing it, and did it once too often, until Parliament rose up against Charles, plunging the kingdom into a bitter civil war that resulted in the execution of the king. So this lie that started the Stuart dynasty in England would have devastating consequences. And within just a generation, the crown that had glittered so brightly on Elizabeth's head was consigned to the flames. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, what a story and what a way of telling it too. And you know that Dr. Borman's books are like that, meticulously researched, but told in such a way which is easy to understand. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
We've got a very short time for questions, I'm afraid. And so are there a couple of questions from the audience? I'm sure there'll be dozens, but if there are a couple of questions...
I can see a lady with her hand up.
Put your hand up.
Yeah.
There we are.
Thank you. Of the other contenders to the throne, which do you think would have been the best option?
Oh, the best. Well, I would say the person who should legally have succeeded was actually not Arbella, who's my own personal favourite, although she would have been a car crash, I think, as a queen, was Lady Catherine Grey's son, Edward. He was legally the rightful king, because he was named by Henry VIII's will. You know, the heirs of the Grey sisters were named. So we should have had a King Edward VII in 1603, not in 1901 when Victoria died. And the thing is, legally, and he might have been the best, but we know so little about him, and I think that's not accidental, because I think he's just been airbrushed out of history. But I think he would probably, I'd put my money on Edward. You know, he seemed like a kind of sensible sort of man. Arbella's great fun, but she's wildly unstable and makes really bad decisions. It wouldn't have been dull with Arbella on the throne, but not necessarily for a very long reign, I don't think. So.
You mentioned the correspondence between Elizabeth and James. Do you think that was Elizabeth educating James?
Yes.
In preparation for him to take the throne? I
think what that correspondence was absolutely Elizabeth acknowledging that James is the strongest blood claimant, even if he's kind of technically illegal, and probably not exactly her favourite, but the best of a bad lot, if I can put it like that. And she certainly gave him an advantage that she didn't give any of the other claimants. So you might say it kind of worked out all right anyway, because he's probably the one Elizabeth would have wanted, and she certainly was trying to help him. Those letters are full of advice, but James disregarded all of it, because he was of the view of his countrymen, and indeed people of England, that women aren't supposed to rule, so what does she know? So he disregards it, and one wonders what would have happened if he hadn't. But I do think it's telling that... So Elizabeth had good reasons not to name an heir for most of her reign, because she knew it kind of created a rival. But why not on her deathbed? And I think that does speak to the fact that she was not totally sure about James. So she sort of left it to fate, if you like. And I would just like to say, as a sort of final word, I'm really passionate about the Historical Association. I have a long-standing kind of partnership and friendship, really, with the HA here on the Isle of Wight. So I just encourage you. There is a lovely lady, Gillian, who will be waving aloft a green leaflet. Please do take one. And there are rumours and plots afoot for me to come and give a talk to the HA next year. So please come and do take a leaflet and find out more.